every single spike of carbon dioxide levels that we've got on the geological record has culminated in an extinction event. The relationship between carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, biodiversity, which includes us, and the climate is intrinsic. In the past 700 million years since complex life arose on Earth, so anything bigger than a single cell, the current event represents the fastest ever rate of extinction. No asteroid, no volcano that took out biodiversity at the speed that it's being lost now. And so the challenge here for everybody today as individuals or policymakers is to realise that we have got this on our shoulders and our future generations depend on us to make the changes necessary. So thank you very much.
So who can offer leadership in this crisis? Extinction Rebels asked their local authorities in Wales to declare climate emergencies. Over half of them have already done so this year. We invited them to the Senedd to share their experience, their progress, their plans, and the barriers. I wish we could say the same about the response of the Assembly.
We are one of the councils that declared a climate emergency, which was back in June, went through council. Everybody agreed to that. And one of our targets was obviously to be set a net carbon neutral by 2030. So that was our main headline from it. We've actually done quite a lot on energy efficiency and climate reduction over the past 15 years at least. So we had an energy plan within the council, a 10-year strategy, and that's come to an end this year. So for 10 years we're doing energy reduction. And 10 years ago when we set that up, we actually set up an investor save scheme, so a revolving scheme with £800,000 in that scheme. So over 10 years we've done 266 projects within that 800,000. Any money that gets saved on electricity savings or cost saving, that goes back into the pot. So we still have the £800,000 there. So that's going to carry on, and that will carry on as part of this work as well. 10 years ago we had we planted, I think it was 8 climate change woodlands, where we got local people to adopt an area of land, plant trees and have their own climate change woodlands, and which was really effective. We had thousands of people who planted those, so I think that was really good.
When we declared a climate emergency, as part of that, I called upon and wrote to the First Minister asking that the Welsh Government measures things in a better way than simply GDP. We need to be measuring people's well-being and not the rate at which we use up the world's resources.
We've got growing challenges as well. For a city of coming up to 400,000 people, it swells to about 500,000, probably 120,000 cars coming into Cardiff every day. So that's a big thing for us. We're going to try and reduce the number of cars in and around Cardiff by about half within the next 10 years. We're going to try and double the number of public transport, cycling and walking within that time as well. Huge challenges. If you go around the back of Senedd Road, near the centre of town, there's now a fully segregated, serious highways work going on to build fully segregated cycleway, which is as good as anything there is in the UK. In terms of the decision-making process, the thing that I really am hoping you can help us with in the citizens panels and the public assemblies, I think we call them, I'm getting people coming to me asking for things unheard of a few years ago, and now coming to me saying, can we close down this road? Can we close down Castle Street to through traffic? Can we put a bus lane in there that they never would have done before? But then there are also people who think that's completely mad. So we do need support from them for the likes of these panels and from the friends we're speaking with today.
Like everyone else, all the authorities here, we declared a climate emergency. It was a member-led initiative. I understand that Aled Vaughan Owen, the proposer of the motion, did discuss the wording with yourselves before the motion was put forward. It's effectively looking at, like others have said, being a net zero carbon local authority by 2030. We have a history of working on this agenda as well, so it's not something that is unusual to us, but obviously now it's the scale and the ultimate target of being net zero by 2030. What we've realised, though, regardless of how well we perform, we will always have a residual carbon footprint. So the net in net zero carbon is very important. It allows us to compensate for our footprint. So our preferred method for compensation is by major renewable energy schemes.
Since 2007, we've managed to reduce our emissions by a total of 45%. And we've got actions already underway which are set to reduce them by a further 15% in the next 4 years. As well as the usual energy efficiency measures, we've put hundreds of solar panels on the roofs of our schools, offices, museums, leisure centres. If it's a big building, we've plastered it with solar panels, and there's more on the way. We've invested in a biomass district heating scheme in Aberystwyth, which heats 4 large buildings, one of our main HQs, Canolfan Radol, the Welsh Government building in Aberystwyth, a secondary school and a leisure centre. All of these are heated from a single boiler burning locally sourced wood chips. We've converted much of our street lighting to LED, and that's reduced their emissions by 68%. But of course, as we all know by now, that's not enough, because we haven't just got climate change on our hands, we've got a climate emergency. What we found is a real obstacle to us is the grid connection to rural Wales. We have to book grid connections separately for each initiative. These connections frequently cost as much as 50% of the whole cost of each renewable energy project. If Welsh Government could make a single application for the kind of capacity needed in rural Wales, maybe in a joint venture with local authorities, it could work out a lot cheaper for all of us, and could also stimulate the market in renewables and provide future-proofing. The lack of a good grid connection at a reasonable cost makes many of these projects financially unviable at the moment. If we purchase green energy, which Ceredigion will be doing very shortly, the carbon emission factor set by DEFRA is based on a UK-wide energy mix, not the energy that we're actually using as a council. So we get no direct cost benefit at all from using green energy, and there's no incentive. Now that needs to change.
I think councils are really aware of the climate emergency. You know, when roads are melting due to high heat, the councils are having to try and keep traffic moving. One of the big issues that we're facing is flooding, because we've already got 1 in 5 of our residents live within a flood risk area. Many of you have heard about Fairborn, which is one of the communities in Gwynedd. We may be having to move the community due to climate change, so we're very aware of the situation. We did declare a climate emergency way back in March. I brought it forward working with the local XR group, but the first target was set in 2010, and since then we've reduced carbon emissions by 39.3%. This is kind of going down the route to the traditional things of putting solar panels on buildings. We invested quite early in energy from waste, so we've got an anaerobic digester that rots 11,500 tonnes of food waste, which we collect from households weekly, and it creates biofertiliser for local farmers and 3,500 megawatts of electricity, which is enough for 1,000 homes. We also produce energy from our closed landfill sites where the methane gas rots, and it's turning microturbines, and that's also producing electricity. We're nearly at the end of rolling out LED street lights throughout the whole county. I think we're on about 59% reduction from that at the moment. In terms of our fleet, we have made a commitment to buy electric vehicles, but I am going to put a caveat in there, is that we don't actually see that as being the sustainable long-term solution, because electric vehicles, and if we move our whole fleet to them, will be problematic. So we're actually politically looking at hydrogen rather than electric, and electric is sort of the stopgap in between. We've had a specific member of staff working on staff incentives, how we can encourage staff to use less energy, etc. We developed a programme with school children. We created animated characters and games to get them to learn about energy use. And we're just nudging those changes through things like Skype meetings rather than travelling. We're changing care routes for our care workers, so they're actually working within a community rather than driving around lots of different places. Since the emergency brought in a sustainable procurement policy, we already had had one in place that favoured buying from local suppliers, which obviously helps environmentally and economically for the area. But we're now introducing things like trying to cut out single-use plastics from our supply chain. And we've appointed a plastic-free towns officer who will be there working with communities to try and encourage them to become plastic-free. And we think it's really important that we do work with communities. Since declaring the emergency, we held a Gwynedd 2030 event where we invited community groups, local XR members, etc., to try and create a shared vision about how we can achieve this carbon neutral council that we want to see. And I think this is really important. We've got some great community groups in Gwynedd. We've got sort of the first community hydro scheme to be selling electricity back into the community, which is a challenge with the grid restrictions. We've got things like community-run bus services. Some of those are now getting sort of community-run electric vehicle, community vehicles, so they're sharing vehicles, which I think is a great step forward. I've got responsibility for highways and municipal. So little things I've been able to do are, for example, I've been able to ban the use of glyphosate within our children's parks and play areas, and looking at banning it more widely, but there's a lot of investigation to be done before that. We are pleased to be changing our cutting regimes next year to favour biodiversity, and we'll be working on bringing wildflower verges into the county, both through the cutting regimes and working with communities and third sector groups to be growing local wildflowers that the community can then plant out on the verges and sort of take ownership of it, really. And I now cycle to the council for my meetings, which sounds like it's a small thing, but actually, if you know Snowdonia, you know what that's like. So cycling 26 miles a day is quite a big step, and having the electric bike makes that sustainable for me. And actually what today is about, I think, is about sort of finding an electric bike for us as a community. What can we do to take those small steps that one by one make a positive impact for the planet? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. Very inspiring.
One of the areas I feel that we are doing well with is a pilot scheme that we're trying out with a company called River Simple about hydrogen vehicles, and it's been based in Abergavenny, in one of our main towns, and it's a community-based scheme that's working with this private company, and I'm hoping that this will show some real positive ways forward with exploring how hydrogen might make a difference to our vehicles and our transport situation.
We're really lucky in Monmouthshire. We've got such vibrant and active community groups. And so for the last 11 years, we've had Monmouthshire Community Climate Champions, which is a partnership between transition town groups, Friends of the Earth groups, now latterly Extinction Rebellion, some renewable energy companies who meet regularly with the council, and we do lots of joint projects and stuff. The real challenge is keeping that ambition and being ambitious, but working out what we can do as well in terms of, we're all up against it financially. And I'm sure you all know what it's like. So how can we drive that ambition and work differently and creatively to make things happen, even though we're kind of quite constrained?
We declared a climate emergency on the 9th of May, which was approved at full council. We also approved an action to call on Welsh and UK governments to provide necessary support and resource to carry that through. Items then that were subsequently recommended at scrutiny and approved at full council were to commit to making us a net zero carbon authority by 2030. We now have a cross-party working group established. The first meeting of that is going to be tomorrow. We will be discussing then how we engage with third sector and private sector to carry that forward. We're 39% down on our emissions as well, which seems to tally with 40% and 39% that we're hearing. We've documented over 300 energy efficiency measures alone. Potential actions that we're looking at in tomorrow's meeting, we'll be looking obviously at energy and buildings and the hierarchy of energy efficiency, then renewable energy, and then offsetting our remaining emissions, as Kendall alluded to earlier. The social capital of things as well is really important. We shouldn't be looking at building a school on a pounds per pupil basis. We should be looking at lifetime carbon. Procurement is going to be interesting. I know from the carbon positive project that NRW did, procurement accounted for 50% of the carbon emissions of the organisation. I think we've missed an opportunity as a public sector for having a Welsh Government framework for all public sector organisations to call off for EV charging infrastructure. Pembrokeshire, we've gone ahead on our own. We've got 32 points out there now, and we'll double that this year. We've shared our specification as widely as possible because we want a joined up charging network. We want people to be able to pay in the same way. We just want it to be easy. And my final gripe would be the UK and the world's subsidies for fossil fuel extraction and exploration. The UK tops the list in the EU with its 12 billion euros of support in 2016, whilst cutting renewable energy subsidies. So I'll leave it on that happy thought there.
I'd like to add, Chris Thomas is a councillor in Pembrokeshire, cabinet member, who can't be here, but he's also been adding community buyouts. He's been facilitating communities to buy out sections of their assets, such as swimming pools, libraries, theatres, or to run them, community old schools, and lots of pubs, and now community farms. And that is taking it out of the area of just the council alone and giving it back to the communities to transform their future themselves, which I think is a really important role for councils.
We're looking at the actual grounds of the school as well as the way in which they're built. And one of the officers, by having these sort of cross-portfolio initiatives, one of the officers actually said to me, do you think we could put an orchard in every school we build? And we said, well, why not? So, you know, that's actually on the agenda to be looked at next. And so with all, I think it's £166 million 21st century school rebuilding programme in the next 3 years, and hopefully every school will have, as well as their own sort of wildflower tree areas, they'll have an orchard as well. We can be fleet of foot when we want to. Somebody had said to us, sent a photo in, saying, why can't you have a bucket and spade bin on Barry Island? And we said, well, why can't we? So we said to the officers, why can't we have a bucket and spade bin on Barry Island, stop all this stuff being binned at the end of the day? Within 3 days, they had got some old pallets, they had got some old tennis court netting, and they had made one, and it was in place on Barry Island Beach. Now, the press coverage that we got from that, the social media coverage that we got that, was much more powerful than an awful lot of policies within the council. It sent out a clear message. What we've also done is that in most of the places that you might want to visit in the Vale, say like Barry Island or some of our parks or whatever, we have now water refill stations. We've put in 18 so far with another 14 planned. We've got a refill scheme with shops and things, but if you go to Barry Island at either end of the beach, you can go and refill your bottle with water free of charge, and you don't even have to go into a shop and ask. 2 challenges. One, we need joined up thinking with Welsh Government, so the measures that we're subscribing to on some areas need to actually be mindful of challenges in other areas. And the other one is actually engaging with the public. We discovered recently that over 50% of our commingled recycling was being contaminated because we had tolerated people putting recycling into white plastic bags. So we stopped it. It caused chaos. We had to give out over 80,000 council issue recycling bags within 2 weeks. It all went a bit haywire. But what we've done, what we've achieved in that, and we also were pilloried in the press, but what we've done in that, we have now in one fell swoop removed 4.5 million single-use plastic bags from the waste stream every year. We're still being shouted at some people on social media, but the impact in terms of single-use plastics has been mega. So we do need to be a bit brave. Thanks very much.
Machynlleth is in a very different position from the huge county councils because we're a small town of 2,000 and something people, and we had a petition signed by hundreds of people, and the town councillors accepted it unanimously. The remit of Machynlleth Town Council is really small. We've got one large building, listed building. We run the toilets and the town clock and things like that. Specific things that we need outside impact. One is transport, obviously, better public transport. A nice rail line up through the middle of Wales would be wonderful, and then we might have got here earlier this morning. Funding for more cycle paths, electric charging points, as has been said already, vehicle charging points. And then we also want better support for making homes more energy efficient. There are various schemes, but they only apply to certain people. And there isn't any easy way these days for people to get some nice, clear, easy information on what they can do in their own homes. We have listed buildings in Machynlleth and we have a conservation area. And in the planning policy, it says single glazed windows should be replaced with single glazed windows. I'm passionate about historic buildings, but we have to have a planning policy which supports us to make them efficient. We have to be able to put secondary double glazing into even precious listed buildings. So those are the sort of things that I think other people can help with.
I should have been accompanied by a representative today of a group called Greener Towyn. Small groups like this, I think they are promoting the climate emergency very well. We also are fortunate in Towyn to have a cinema called the Magic Lantern. We have films, debates, open days again to promote low carbon issues. And we are fortunate, like Machynlleth, to have the Centre for Alternative Technology. Quite often we've had them come down to the town and tell us exactly what's happening. And it's quite frightening what's going to happen to this world if we don't start acting now. In the summer months, our population triples. So getting rid of single-use plastic, introducing paper bags. Milk is starting to come back in bottles, so is fruit juices. The problem is, I think, all over, that we travel a lot using our cars. As we said here, wouldn't it be nice to have that train going up through Wales, which would have saved me driving 130 miles to come here yesterday. We had solar panels in Towyn approximately 8-9 years ago. The trouble is with the solar panels, we had to have a bigger storage capacity because the electric stored has not been used. This is happening in towns and big cities in the world, that we're overproducing some of the solar energy. We can't give it back in, and that needs to be addressed.
Recently, we completed probably the largest land transfer in Wales, 130 acres from Powys County Council to the Town Council last year, and we've worked with community groups to work with us on changing the way that land is used, some of it more intensively, but also with a mind to climate change as well. So, for instance, already we are planning and planting a wet woodland, and this will actually mitigate flooding, but also it takes the runoff from some of our residential areas and goes through the wet woodland before it goes into the River Severn. So we're actually reducing flooding, but also at the same time cleaning the water, and it's recreational use for local residents as well, because they can walk through this lovely wet woodland. On the grassland, we're looking at how we do our cutting schedules, our maintenance schedules, looking at in the future a use of an anaerobic digester for the green waste, all the grass cuttings, trees and from the park areas there as well, to see how that may work. Most of our land, of 130 acres, has a high value as a recreation space, but it doesn't mean we can't find certain areas to put PV. Where we have things like muggers, so play areas for children, or young people, we're looking at putting canopies over them, so we can cover the areas, make it more user-friendly, and at the same time generate PV off of that. We're looking also at having more allotments. There's sites for 3 more allotments on this land area, and we're also looking at the site for both fruit production, both top and soft fruit production as well. The biggest barrier for us is not having powers to act. We can act in conjunction with doing something else, but we can't act for it to produce a low carbon future. So there's a bill going through the Assembly at the moment looking at giving town councils and community councils a power of competence. Just moving this bill forward as fast as possible to give us the power of competence would allow us to act across a much wider area and allow us to change quickly. Something where a town or community council can make a difference is in planning. We ask for 2 cycle lockers per housing unit. If you're building flats or apartments, then from the very beginning people have the ability to have bicycles and use them as well. But we've also got in Newtown a very rare black poplar. We've taken cuttings from that and we propagated them, and we will now plant them in our open spaces. And just to say, it's in the Welsh Tree of the Year competition at the moment, so if you can vote for it, please do. Thank you.
environment agenda is one where the public has started grabbing politics by the scruff of the neck more than any, and Extinction Rebellion more than any has managed to do that. I was delighted that the motion put before the Assembly declaring a climate emergency was in my name. That was in direct response to public opinion very graphically shifting through the actions of Extinction Rebellion.
If I were not a politician, but I were a lobbyist, I would now be putting together the manifesto for the environment, for the climate, for biodiversity, to put in front of every party leader to commit to before the next Assembly election, because that's the way you get the long-term thinking.
After the conference, Extinction Rebellion held an evaluation. We asked, was it worthwhile? Overwhelmingly, we felt that it was. For us, to hear people with practical experience speaking with so much enthusiasm made us feel less alone. The Council recognised barriers. All our work in decarbonising is being undermined by the amount of investment and funding given to fossil fuels. This has to stop. Finally, we heard that the use of land and farming is going to be a core element in creating a zero-carbon future. There is much that must change, but unless we get that right, we have little hope of a zero-carbon Wales. At our low-carbon conference in Wales, we experienced deliberative democracy, a different way of reaching conclusions which works. There is much work to be done going forward. We need much more of this sort of approach to discussions. We have a huge challenge to change how central government works, and I think Extinction Rebellion and the councils are vital to our future. So what next? I think we need more experience-based real democracy like this conference. Deliberative democracy, where the people doing the work come together to listen, learn and decide what government should do to help them succeed.
Coming together as people's assemblies, it's a really powerful thing because it's actually holding power and holding the people who are supposedly in power to account. It's too big an issue for us to only come at it in a partisan way. We have to get this right and the time is now. So diolch yn fawr iawn am bopeth dych chi'n neud. You are an inspiration to us all. Thank you.